Welcome to the Johnny Basketball MIAC 2026 preview. The postseason's here, and today we're breaking down St. John's path, the key matchups, and what it'll take for the Johnnies to make a run. I'm joined by the voice of the Johnnies, Mark Lewandowski, and longtime Johnny fan, super fan, I must say, and historian Tim McNamara. Now, before we get to talking about tonight's matchup against Concordia, let's talk about this team in more general terms, starting with this team's strengths. Mark, let's start with you. How would you characterize this team in terms of its strengths?
I think the guard play has come a long way. Baden Bean has shown the most growth, maybe outside of Vincent Hillesheim, on anybody on the team. And you can't assess this team based on, what they offer. If you look at what they were before the break and how they've matured coming down. And I think the guard play has been excellent. They're starting to make shots, as Pat said. That has been huge. To see that ball go through the hoop raises the confidence level of everybody. They don't back down from anyone. I think they are one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the conference. That has helped them tremendously. They're pretty good overall. I think they're +5, +6 on the glass. So it's rebounding. They've started to play better defense, and they've started to hit shots. And those are the big three. And Peyton Badani is not playing like a freshman right now. He's playing like a junior or a senior, and that's very exciting. With the youth on the team, I just hope they don't get overwhelmed by the moment. We can talk more about that later.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths also is the depth that St. John's has. I mean, Pat has been known for years. He plays 9 to 10 guys. We're doing that again this year, despite the loss of Kyle Johnson and Charlie Theis's unavailability due to injury. It's shortened the bench a little bit, but still, they're 9 guys deep, and that's one of the big advantages they have.
Well, you both mentioned growth and change and improvement. How about some of those weaknesses maybe that still haven't been cleaned up? You got to be candid. Where are the weak spots on this team? And we'll get more to that when we talk about their specific opponents. But what about weaknesses? Tim, why don't you start?
Let's be real careful on who we put on the free throw line. That's been one of their Achilles heels, and to Pat's credit, he's been really good about offense, defense, later stages of the game to get those guys who have struggled at the line on the floor defensively and not on the floor offensively. And I think his substitution patterns have helped to offset that greatly. The offense that they run and driving the ball to the middle of the lane, things can get clogged up in there. And when they're not playing well, that's where we see their turnovers. If the ball gets sticky and it doesn't move from side to side, that's also when they end up taking some bad shots or having a shot clock violation. You'll hear Pat yelling, "You'll move the ball," and that's going to be really key to them. So I think when they've struggled, it's because they've gotten out of sync offensively. So that's a cause for concern. Their rebounding has actually been a strength, as Mark has pointed out. They're streaky on their shooting. When they're hitting their threes, they're as tough as anybody. When the threes are not falling, it's okay, what's plan B? Do we just keep firing away and hope we get hot, or do we start to take the ball inside and try something different?
Yeah, plan B, that is a great point, Tim. I don't know that there is a plan B, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's not a great post presence. Now, Vincent Hillesheim has come a long way, but he is not like, Zach Hansen, who's going to seal a guy off, get the ball inside, even a Lucas Walford, who would do that kind of thing, or you could just lob it up to Lucas, and at 6'9", with those long arms, he could do some different things. So, but that they've learned how to play without a true post presence, although Vincent is as close as it's getting. But he's so mobile, and they use him out on the perimeter, and he's a pretty good passer. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that. That's one of the downfalls of, and Pat knows that. I mean, they're constantly looking for big guys. One of the things that we haven't talked about is defensive breakdowns. And there have been a fair share of those this year. And it's very frustrating because Pat will go over these things in the walkthrough, and I'll see it, develop the other team. And even if it's not something he's gone through and walked through, they get sometimes hung up on screen and rolls, pick and rolls, and that kind of thing. Or somebody all of a sudden just comes wide open. And it's like, did we not catch the switch, or are we, so defensively, this team has to get better if they want to move into the MIAC final and to even take that next step to the NCAA tournament.
I'd echo from that perspective, Mark. Is I'll say one guy that they missed from last year in the way he plays is Connor Schwab. Connor was undersized, but he did the dirty work, and he was the guy who was banging in there. Jamison Lean comes off the bench and plays a similar game. Thomas Mank in the last few games, the senior, has come off, and he's been that physical presence inside. And I think we're going to have to see both Jamison and Thomas sort of become Connor Schwab-like when it comes to defending.
Especially with this matchup with Concordia, but we can touch on that here in a little bit.
Yeah, great perspectives. And we do need to get to Concordia. But before we do that, just quickly, how did we get to this point? A number 2 seed, got the bye for the quarterfinals. Talk about that and these quarterfinal games, and who the last teams here are in this tournament.
We got here as the 2 seed with our wins over Carleton. Tim and I would both agree those two. And when you look at the tiebreaker setup, and when you have 4 or 5 teams that are tied for 4 teams, I guess they're tied for the 2 seed. We lost a tough game to St. Olaf, but we had the 2 wins against Carleton, and we split with Concordia. So we did what we needed to do. We got a sweep in there, Tim, and I think that propelled us to the 2 seed when they looked at all the tiebreakers, which was crazy. When you walked in last Saturday and you heard if we win and if Carleton wins, we're the number 2 seed. And Carleton definitely, I have all the confidence in the world in Ryan Kershaw's team. They didn't play well last night, especially in the second half. But when we heard that, I thought, okay, there's a chance. We got a chance here.
And I thought it was great that Dan McCain and the MIAC office worked through the 8 different scenarios that were out there going into the last game of the season and sent those scenarios out to the schools. So the schools knew, and if the coaches knew if they wanted to, exactly what had to happen that day. Again, kudos to Dan and the MIAC for laying out all the scenarios, and the teams knew what they had to do, and St. John's got it done.
Last night, when you break down these games, the Cobbers are so big, and I think Carleton struggled with that, but Carleton also, I think, had some defensive breakdowns in the second half, and that's why they're not part of the MIAC Final Four, and I don't think they shot the ball all that well. And Jacob Cook became Jacob Cook. I mean, he is so dominant with the ball, even sometimes without the ball, but more so with the ball. When he's got the ball, he's such a big threat to score for the Cobbers. So hard to contain. He's a tough size at 6'6", 6'7", and you can't, if he's out of the perimeter, you can't ignore him because he can shoot 3-pointers.
And he had the rebounds to go with it last night. I think he had 15 and Logie had 14. So, yeah. I mean, those 2 guys are a 1-2 punch, but don't lose sight of we have our Peyton, right? They've got 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Belke and Shell. And Shell as a first year player, great perimeter players. Both of them have gone off for big games. And I think that might be one of the keys is that, tough to stop Cook. I'm guessing that Cheddar's going to get that defensive assignment. He usually draws the leading scorer on the other team. But I think he'll have to get supplemented. I see Thomas Mank coming in. I see Jamison Lean coming in. And that combination inside to try to combat Cook and Logie is going to be the challenge for St. John's.
I'm going to talk about Augsburg.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with their fight last night down at St. Olaf. They'd beaten St. Olaf, kind of blown them out, put 100 points on them 2 games. And all of a sudden, St. Olaf figured out how better to defend them, and it turned into what we've seen, which is an MIAC postseason tournament game. And they never quit, Tim. They kept coming, and they have some tough matchups themselves. And St. Olaf, people need to know, they were shorthanded. They were missing a starter, and they were missing a key reserve. A.J. Ewell didn't play, which hurts their size inside. Yeah. And Chris Willis coming off the bench, I believe it's Chris Willis coming off the bench, is a guard who can do a lot of different things. And again, Dan Kosmowski is shorthanded with his rotation and has to adjust on the fly based off of, I lost those guys Saturday. Now how do I build a rotation and who's going to play where? And I thought they did a nice job, but St. Olaf kind of had a St. John's type meltdown. When we were at Concordia, they stopped scoring. They got outscored 9-2 over the final 2.5 minutes, I think, and missed some key free throws.
Yeah, Augsburg made 2 free throws. Semenko made 2 free throws to win the game with 4 seconds left. So talk about pressure. And he's a freshman. So, hats off to Aaron and his team to beat St. Olaf 3 times this year is quite an accomplishment.
So we've split with Concordia this year, moving back to the Concordia game. So let's talk about the sixth man. And is that going to be the difference? We lost up there. We won down here. What are you guys expecting? And what's that matchup going to look like late in the season and on our home court?
Yeah, I missed the first game between these two. We had the football playoff game at River Falls, so I missed it. I was a little taken aback by the score, but then I thought, okay, this team realized some of its potential that day and how good they can be. What I noticed for both games, I think St. John's has done well on the glass against Concordia Moorhead, and that is key. And Pat will drum that into their heads. We have to control the boards. We can't let Logie and Cook, like, they did the other night against Carleton, dominate. It's going to be key that St. John's, and, for St. John's not being a big team, they do rebound well. Now, knock on wood, that continues, but that is going to be one of the biggest keys. And the other thing is to make it as tough as possible for Cook to get going. And, Henry Cheddar he's got a tough assignment. I think you're right with Lean and maybe Menk. Right. Rotating in to give him a little different look and more size to deal with. Vincent Hillesheim's got a tough job. Logie is a good post player. And I think Peyton Belka is key from a standpoint of he has to play well for Concordia to win tonight. There's no doubt about that. But he's got a tough road because Baden Bean's defense has really picked up a little bit here down the stretch, going more for steals. He's learned how to play the angles a little bit better. And I don't know what they're going to do with Peyton Badani. Is it going to be their Peyton or is it going to be Belk? I mean, they don't really have a guy I know that, matches up with Peyton from a standpoint of, Peyton's a 6'3" guard. He can be physical. We've seen him start to take it to the hoop more, which I like. And Baden needs to do that too tonight. He needs to be selfish. If he can get by Peyton or whoever's on him and get to the hoop, he needs to do it because he's very good when he gets to the hoop.
Yeah, and that the first game when we played him, first of all, a long time ago, right back in December. The other thing is we had Kyle Johnson for that game, and Kyle had a good game that night. So obviously we don't have him available, and not having Charlie. I believe it was it was at Concordia. Charlie actually started that game and played 9 minutes, and then tweaked that knee again.
Right.
And he really hasn't played more than a couple minutes since then. So his availability always in question. If we've got him, he's an impact player coming off the bench. He's a high energy guy, and boy, that would be fantastic if he was in a position to be able to go. But if he isn't, we've seen in these last few games Thomas Mank coming in as a senior, kind of finally getting his shot, right? And talk about making the most of it. I think Thomas has played really, really well. And Vincent has had some tremendous games, went 8 or 9 one game and had like 3 dunks. Now, he might not quite get that same look going up against Logie, but, Vinny's footwork has improved so much. He's quicker. He's certainly stronger. We've seen that. And as a team, St. John's rebounds surprisingly well, as Mark said, for not having another post besides Vinny. Bean is a great rebounder. Podani is a great rebounder. Yeah. Cheddar's a great rebounder. So, they spread the wealth there. And like I say, the other thing, 4 of Concordia's starters have played over 800 minutes this season. And their starters all played well over 30 minutes the other night. In fact, most of them played over 36 minutes. They could be a little tired.
Tim,
they're young guys, but they're tired.
And they don't play 9 guys. I don't think
7. Maybe 8, but 7. Yep. But their starters really chew up their minutes, and I think that's a big advantage that we have is how Pat can deploy his bench, and we can run 9 guys at him. 10 if we got Charlie.
Good setup, guys. We're up against the end of our time for this segment, but in the last few seconds here, predictions and either score or spread. Mark?
St. John's wins 75-71. It's going to be tight, right to the wire. You got seniors on the other side who don't want their careers to come to a close. You've got a Johnny team that's young that I hope doesn't wake up and go, "Oh, we're in the MIAC semifinals. We gotta figure out how." I just want them to play with confidence, but don't want them to get overwhelmed in the situation.
St. John's 75-71. Tim?
St. John's wins. I think we're going to have to score 75 points to do that. My score was going to be very similar to what Mark had. You know, the last games, that's where they've fallen. You know, in the 70s, I think we might have got to 82 when we beat them earlier this year. But in the last 8 times that these teams have played, St. John's is 5 and Concordia's won 3. So it's been competitive, and the games have all been close. I don't see any reason that this isn't going to be any different, but the good guys will win.
Well, that was a lot, but you didn't give me the number. You said 75, but you're missing the other number. 70.
I think our defense is better than Mark thinks.
You're back
70.
at that. All right.
Okay,
Fair
great.
enough.
Pat sees this. He's going to chew me out. That's great. Thank you, Tim.
All right, guys. Perfect. Great to catch up on this. We'll look forward to maybe doing this after they win, and we can set up the final. Take care.